1995 was, to put it mildly, a banner year for fans of Jane Austen. Not only did we get the miniseries of Pride and Prejudice, which quickly shot to the top of many people's favorites lists, but we also got Ang Lee's Sense and Sensibility, which was, of course, written by and starring Emma Thompson. But before either of these now famous and highly regarded adaptations were unleashed on the world, there was a little movie called Persuasion, directed by Roger Michell and adapted by Nick Dear. It aired on television in the United Kingdom, but it did get a theatrical release in the US. In case anyone is unfamiliar, the story follows Anne Elliot, an unmarried woman who rejected the marriage proposal of one Frederick Wentworth and has regretted it ever since. 8 years later, Frederick Wentworth, now Naval Captain Wentworth, reappears on the scene. But will the feelings that were so strong in the past emerge once again, or will she be doomed to watch him marry another? As someone who finished reading the novel of Persuasion for the first time not very long ago, I was very interested to check this out. And I'm not going to try disguising my feelings for this film, because I thought it was kind of incredible. It's not a 100% faithful adaptation of the novel, because those don't really exist for any book, and it's not perfect, but to me, in terms of bringing this story to life, it comes pretty close. There were the usual stumbling blocks of trying to reconcile one's mental picture of all these characters with who was cast in the roles for the movie, but I got over that fairly quickly as these performances grew on me. I had some trepidation going into this movie because the book is one that depends very heavily on things left unsaid, and we follow much of the story through Anne's thoughts. And as the movie began, you could feel the screenwriter's need to express some of this backstory in dialogue, which got me nervous for what was to come. For example, the character of her sister Elizabeth, voicing who Captain Wentworth is and why Anne in particular would remember him when his family is mentioned. But once that was out of the way, the director and the writer showed remarkable restraint, letting the subtleties of the performances guide us through what our protagonists are feeling, rather than spelling out every single change, worry, and relief through exposition. And the main two performances, Amanda Root as Anne and Ciaran Hinds as Wentworth, were both really terrific. Amanda Root did appear older and even more subdued than I had imagined Anne to be, but what works so well is that you can see Anne change throughout the film as she spends more time in the presence of Wentworth and also with the Musgrove family. There is a strong emphasis on the characters wearing little to no makeup, and I'm not sure if it's just changes in lighting or perhaps a little more makeup being applied by later in the film, but Anne does become brighter, more cheerful, and just exudes a happier mindset and feelings, especially by the final scenes. Amanda Root is capable of conveying so much in silence, and just watching her as she listens to others is a huge strength of her portrayal of Anne. One example is her overhearing Wentworth and Louisa Musgrove when they're having a conversation some distance away. There are several moments in the movie and in the book where so much of either Anne's or Wentworth's feelings about their own relationship are discovered through their comments regarding others. And this scene is staged so well, with her sitting below the conversation, out of their sight, and you watch her expression change as she listens to them. Ciaran Hinds is perfect in his role. I knew he starred in this movie before I started reading, so I did have the benefit of attaching his face to the character in my mind, and I think he achieves what Jane Austen did so seamlessly in the novel. He gives the impression of perhaps having moved on from Anne long ago, and his polite interactions with her give off an air of just being acquaintances now, which leads to Anne's constant uncertainty. What changes with watching the movie is that you can actually see the chemistry, or lack thereof, between Wentworth and Louisa. In the book, Anne's observances implant the idea that they are a match for one another, and an engagement is likely coming any day now. While watching, you can see that both Louisa and Henrietta are desperate to appeal to Wentworth, him being a new, very eligible bachelor in the area, but he does not reciprocate. He's polite, of course, but there was never a thought for me that these characters, as presented on screen, would ever end up together. The unspoken feelings of the book come to life very well in so many small moments that are given special attention with close-ups and insert shots. There are the little looks that Anne and Wentworth give one another, small, encouraging glances that are undone by a misunderstood comment later. There's the shot of Anne gripping the back of a chair upon first seeing Wentworth again, or his helping her climb into the carriage at one point. There's never a doubt that Anne is still very much in love with Wentworth, and Amanda Root shows us that while keeping up a cool head in public much of the time. But Ciaran Hinds balances the glimpses we get of his true feelings with the unaffected persona that he's trying to display. The director does occasionally allow the cinematography to underline a point a little too obviously than is needed, like the push-in zoom on Anne's face when Wentworth is talking about a man not being able to get over a woman that quickly, in reference to Captain Benwick, but we know who he's really talking about. Thankfully, those moments are few and far between, and even that one isn't bad. It just stands out when so much of the movie trusts the audience to understand what's really going on. The rest of the cast as a whole is quite good, with some standing out more than others. Corin Redgrave as Anne's father was pretty much excellent, really capturing the superficial, pompous, and rude character that the book reveals him to be right from the first chapter. Admiral Croft and his wife, as played by John Woodvine and Fiona Shaw, were also both fantastic. Anne of the book highlights how good they are together and describes their marriage, and in particular Admiral Croft's comfortable, jovial manner. And both actors brought that to life in a way that matched exactly what I'd read. Phoebe Nichols as Elizabeth was quite shrill and perhaps the most startlingly broad of the whole cast. I knew she was intended to be rude, but I read her comments as being more so backhanded compliments rather than overt put-downs that we see here. Sophie Thompson as Anne's other sister Mary was a real highlight, constantly complaining of being sick, but also ever afraid of being slighted in any perceived way. Lady Russell, played by Susan Fleetwood here, didn't quite seem to be a woman that I can see this Anne being such great friends with. So she was maybe the weakest link in my opinion, and her short haircut seemed incongruous with the time period. Maybe there were short hairstyles for women at that time, but it stood out from the rest of this cast. Robert Glenister as Captain Harville was great, a really good-natured friend to Wentworth, and Samuel West brought out the sly, people-pleasing Mr. Elliot very convincingly. There are, as usual with Jane Austen stories, plenty of other characters that I won't get into, but suffice it to say that the rest of the ensemble plays these smaller characters with a great deal of style and makes them all stand out in their own way with the screen time they're given. What I think makes this adaptation work so well is that it doesn't feel like anything is missing. Of course, it's a movie that is less than 2 hours, so not every moment can be enacted, but almost everything is touched on. Things like Mrs. Clay's intentions regarding Anne's father are mentioned late in the film. Mrs. Smith and her nurse and the very useful gossip they provide all make appearances at critical moments, and the scene where Mary sees Mr. Elliot outside a window and forces Anne to divulge that she's aware of his weekend plans, causing Wentworth's jealousy to flare up. That last one in particular is so well played, with several expressions passing over Amanda Root's face in a matter of seconds. First, annoyance at her sister for bothering her, then blurting out that Mr. Elliot is away, then regret as she realizes how this knowledge will sound to Wentworth. And Ciaran Hinds stands behind her, showing that he is indeed very unimpressed with what he's heard. And there are scenes that, dare I say, even improve on what I read. The scene where Louisa falls and gets hurt is a big one. In the book, I wasn't quite clear on the height from which she'd fallen, and as described, didn't seem to merit the drastic response that it got and takes her out of commission for a long time afterward. But in the movie, the location they used is perfect, and the use of slow motion, all of that amps up the danger of the situation and shows that she could very well have been killed. A comedic highlight is the montage of the Musgroves and Mary pulling Anne aside to share their grievances about everyone else in the room. It's both hilarious seeing Anne show the appropriate amount of concern for these petty issues, and also so perfectly sums up how Anne is seen by everyone. She's useful to them and has nothing better to do than take up their cause as her own because her life is stalled out at that point. At least that's what they think. The conversation before the concert is also very good, seeing Anne and Wentworth's small smiles and her trying to forge ahead to build a rapport with him once again. You can see their chemistry being rekindled, only to have it snuffed out once Mr. Elliot rears his head for the I don't know how manyth time. And the letter writing scene. In the book, we only experience it from Anne's perspective, with Wentworth writing a short distance away, and she has no idea what's going on. In the movie, we get cutaways to him reacting to her words, pausing while writing, and finally fumbling to fold the letters he's been writing, and then her reading it while sitting at the table. It's a very dramatic and even intense scene, and was probably one of my favorite moments. As I said, there are changes made to the story as well. None that are really damaging to the story as a whole, though, but can seem somewhat out of place. For instance, there's the moment where Wentworth conveys the offer of ending the lease on Kellynch Hall to Anne from Admiral Croft. That part works, as it does give another example of Wentworth being convinced that his chances with Anne are gone. But then Wentworth goes on to confront Lady Russell about her interfering 8 years ago. I do understand why that was added. There's something satisfying about his getting revenge in a small way, letting her know exactly what he's thinking, but having them never interact is probably more realistic. There's also Anne chasing after Wentworth to prevent him from leaving the concert. I do prefer her more casually making her way to the end of a row to hopefully maneuver another interaction with him, but again, that's not as exciting visually as her rushing through a room as other guests turn around in confusion. And finally, there's the kiss between them on the street after finally all the miscommunications have been smoothed over. Having a kiss to close things out is something that has been added to other adaptations. I believe North and South is another example, and it's a matter of having audiences that are unfamiliar with the book get some payoff after the emotional wrangling they've been through. This is followed by Wentworth announcing to a whole room full of people that he and Anne are engaged and would like to set a date. And then this is followed by cutting to them blissfully happy on the deck of a ship as he is about to head out to sea again, her being the loyal wife of a naval officer. All of this works as far as I'm concerned. Their relationship that precipitated all of these events happened long before either the book or the movie began. So allowing the audience to see them happy and married is a nice ending. It does excise the various endings from the book, explaining what happened to everyone else, and those are satisfying to hear, especially when it comes to Mr. Elliot and Mrs. Clay, but I'm fine with leaving things on the main couple's story. Visually, the movie does a great job of illustrating the differences in the locations we spend time at. Uppercross and Lyme are shown to be warm, inviting, homey places, just like the people that invite Anne to them. And the Elliot family lodgings in Bath are stark, white, uncomfortable rooms with gold furnishings to superficially dress them up, kind of like Anne's family and their relatives that they keep visiting. And lastly, I already mentioned the lack of makeup worn by the cast, but also the costumes. The people we see, even some of the wealthier ones, wear a lot of plain clothing. Sometimes, like Anne's brother-in-law Charles, they wear almost dirty clothing. I like that contrast as well. The people that we and Anne enjoy spending time around aren't too concerned with their finery. And then we visit Bath, and her father is sitting there wearing a floral suit. So, Persuasion is a story that I was not very familiar with a short time ago. I might have only even heard about it after I was reading about Jane Austen when I first watched Pride and Prejudice, but I quickly became a fan. It's a story that deals with much more mature characters in comparison to the younger leads of like Sense and Sensibility, and the movie does it justice. If you've never watched it, I highly recommend it. There's also a mini-series from 1971 that I'm curious to check out, and also a movie from... Nope. I heard about that one from 2022, and I barely got through the trailer. I can only imagine how insufferable the movie must be. Anyway, let's forget about that. The 1995 film is great. I'm not sure what other people think of it, or if there even is a consensus, but I had a great time with it. Again, highly recommended. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, I hope you'll check back to Hildebrand Productions for more. Thanks again, and adios for now.